Good evening. This is the Plymouth Charter Commission, live in the Great Hall in Plymouth. The meeting tonight of the Charter Commission will be a hybrid meeting, meaning it's in person as well as on a Zoom webinar. And it can be viewed live on the local government Channel 15, Comcast, and Channel 47, Verizon. This meeting is being recorded. Zoom attendees must register using the Zoom webinar link on the Charter Commission page on the town website. Zoom attendees also, for public comment, please use the raise hand icon on the lower portion of your screen. The in-person audience for public comment, please use the podium and place your name on the sign-in sheet. First item on our agenda will be the joining the Pledge of Allegiance.
United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Tonight we will be welcoming the team from the Collins Center for Public Management at UMass. They will be coming in to us via Zoom. Michelle, is Michael Ward here yet and his team? Okay. When you can hear us, Mike, let us know.
I'm here. I can
Okay.
hear you. I missed the middle of that, but I'm here now.
Very good. Welcome. And you have folks with you? I see Patricia Lloyd.
Yep. And
Yeah.
we should have Libby Corbo as well.
All right, have a good night, Brooke. Leave anything else?
Okay, very good. Thank you. So, and it looks like Elizabeth Corbo is also coming on. The first item of business tonight is the review and discussion of the Collins Agreement, which I worked out with Mike Ward over the past week, going back and forth with revisions. There aren't very many, but the agreement I sent out to everybody on the commission late last week. It's 5 pages. We'd like to get it approved tonight or make any changes to it that you see, and then if, assuming it is in order and we approve it, it will be given to Michelle will get it to the town manager, and the town manager will sign it. I already sent it to Lynn Barrett today, and she's said it was fine as far as she was concerned. It provides for 2 payments, an upfront payment of $6,000, and then the balance, which will be in the next fiscal year, would be paid upon the conclusion of the project with Collins, which we think would be around sometime in November, after we've gone through the presentation of the final report, which is November 16th. So, is there any questions, comments, statements, or whatever involving the agreement itself? It's called Professional Services Agreement. Everybody had a chance to review it. It's pretty straightforward. The first page, it states the term, the fact that it's confidential. The payment structure, as I said, is only 2 payments. The limitation of liability. One item you might note on the second page is that neither parties to use the name of the other in their advertising. In other words, Collins can't use the town of Plymouth in its promotional material, nor can we use Collins Management if we were advertising the work of this commission. It has a very liberal termination clause of basically 30 days written notice. It can be terminated. And if so, the payment would be made to Collins for work performed through the date of termination. That's basically it. Then if no one has any questions or comments, Mike, do you want to say anything about the agreement before we vote? David Peck.
I guess my question is, do we need in there a phrase that the chairman shall invite Collins to come? I mean, we've got our kind of up to 16 meetings, but I didn't know whether if we need less than the 16 meetings, kind of who decides, or should we have a sentence in there saying, you know, the chairman shall invite or kind of authorize the attendance, you know, in advance of whatever the meeting is?
Right.
Otherwise, I'll say I'm fine with the agreement, but it just.
Yeah, I think the
kind of,
way it reads,
who
we,
decides and when that Collins comes to join us?
I would think that would be a commission decision, Dave, that I would
Yeah.
review with the other commissioners. It provides for a ceiling of 16 meetings in the agreement. We may get the work done in less than 16 meetings. And if it takes more than 16, then Collins has said they would be agreeable to negotiating the extra meetings as necessary.
Yeah, I just didn't know that we needed to say something that the commission shall decide, or whether it's implicit, that's all.
Well, I mean, I can certainly give you my word. I would make the decision without consulting with the commission.
Yep.
Mike, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I think we covered that in the first sentence, well, I've got mine is still redlined, but I presume it's on page 3. First sentence after the bullets, the center project team will attend commission meetings where the project team's attendance is requested by the commission and scheduled in advance with the project team up to a total of 16 meetings.
Yeah, Michelle, just a little louder than that. It was a little too loud. Now we're going to scale it back
Okay,
slightly.
you're right, I see it there, so it's in the overview in the services. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I'm looking for a motion to accept the agreement. Mr. Kaiser?
So move.
It's been moved. Has it been seconded? Seconded by Betsy in wrestling. So the motion on the floor is to approve the Collins agreement in the form you have in front of you. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Thank you. Looks like it's unanimous. There were no objections. So we've approved the Collins agreement. And Michelle, you will put it in the pipeline to be signed. Thank you. Just so, one minor question came up as to whether we needed to get 3 quotations being procuring of services, and because Collins is associated with the University of Massachusetts, the agreement is exempt from that requirement of state law, so we don't need to have any other quotes for these consultant services. Very good. So we'll start tonight with availing ourselves of these services. Mike, did you want to lead off a bit and talk a bit how you're going to proceed, and then we can have that discussion?
Sure, I'd be happy to just say a couple quick words before we dive in. First of all, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission, we appreciate the opportunity to work with you on this important work. The charter work that we do as a center is near and dear to my heart, and I find it interesting, and I find it always touches on so many different aspects of local government and community that I wish more people spent more time on it. I know Plymouth has spent a lot of time on it over the past 5 or 10 or so more years, and I wish more would take up the mantle to the extent that Plymouth has shown that there's a lot of work that can be done on the charter that really is going to impact residents' lives in a significant way. So we really thank you. We appreciate the opportunity to work with you. As you can see, there are 3 of us here tonight. Probably at most meetings you'll see 2 of us. It will depend on any given meeting which 2, depending on the substance, the particular topic being discussed, whose expertise and whose availability, because we know you have a really fast tempo here. But I should also mention that it's not just the 3 of us in the charter team. There are 3 more part of the center who have deep expertise in charters and charter work. And we'll all be putting our heads together in between the meetings to follow up on the research and the drafting that come out of the work that we do tonight and meetings going forward. I guess just 2 more things before we dive in, well, 2 more things for me, and then I'll give Libby and Pat a chance to weigh in as well if they have things they want to add. First, we know that every charter commission has a different rhythm to it, a different feel to it. And so if you'll bear with us in these first meeting or two as we figure out, what this commission likes, is it more PowerPoint? Is it more spreadsheet? Is it more just talking? How much do you want us to say up front versus just diving right into questions to you? So we'll if you'll bear with us first, a meeting or two as we kind of adapt to your commission's rhythm. We would appreciate that. And then the second thing I will say is gets a little bit to how I think we were envisioning this going, because you've got a pretty as I noted a minute ago, you've got a lot of meetings, you've got a lot of ground I know you want to cover in a pretty short time. So we've been trying to think of, how do we make this most effective? How do we make it most efficient to cover the ground that you want to cover, cover the topics that you want to cover, and get everything accomplished. And I think what we'd like to try out first is, and I'll give you an example using this meeting and the next meeting. So we'll cover as many topics as we can tonight at a kind of conceptual level. We'll talk through them. We want to get out of the commissioners, what you're trying to go for. Then in between now and the next meeting, or between now and the next few meetings, we'll be, depending on the particular piece, we'll be gathering together and pulling together options for text that hopefully accomplishes what you have set out in the discussions this evening, what you're trying to accomplish. And then we'll start off the next meeting, reviewing that text, approving it to the extent that you want to approve it, or asking us to make further adaptations as needed, adaptations as needed. And then once we cover that ground, we'll pick up with a conceptual discussion of the next topic on the list, or the next topics. So that we hope to always be kind of, working on drafting some pieces and getting an understanding of where you want to go with the next pieces. And hopefully, with that approach, we can both cover what you want to cover at and do so effectively. If it doesn't work after a few meetings for one reason or another, we are obviously, we're here to adapt and serve you however is best. So we can, for some reason we find that approach isn't working, we'll try something else. But I think it has proved a good way in the past to keep things moving forward. That's all I have to say up front here. So before we dive in, Libby or Pat, do you have anything you want to add?
That it's a pleasure to be working with you, and I look forward to helping navigate the process.
Well, before you start, I just want to be sure we have a two-way communication here. Can you hear us when we speak back to you?
Yep.
Okay, I just want to reiterate two things that we said at the last meeting, just for, perhaps we all know it, but not everybody watching knows it. We decided right up front that the Charter Review Committee, which spent 2 years, from 2017 basically to 2018, went through the charter in great detail, every item of grammar, punctuation, et cetera, really got down on every page, line by line, and gave it a very thorough review. We don't think we need to do that again. That was just very short time since we accomplished that task. Instead, we're concentrating on the major functions of our government, the major pieces of it, such as the Committee of Precinct Chairs, Advisory Committee, Select Board, and all the rest of it, to see whether they are working up to their full capacity, whether they need to be fixed in any respect, and how they relate to each other. But these are really conceptual items which we're going to take up at each of these meetings. And the first meeting we had agreed to do was the Committee of Precinct Chairs. The other point I just want to make is that in the actual agreement, I just call attention of the commissioners to where it says services. So it basically consists of four basic services. One is to help the commission discuss the topics, significant topics, and make decisions and provide frameworks. 2 is general guidance. 3 is the actual research, and this is where we hope to gain the insights from Collins, from working with all these other charters across the state, and do additional research as necessary. And 4, I view kind of as the real guts of the work, which is the drafting, the back and forth, the revisions, the editing, where they draft, we review, we edit, we may do some drafting and back and forth. And that's why basically the way the meeting schedule is set up, they would be with us every other meeting, not every meeting. We would be meeting probably every week until we get the bulk of the work done. They would be joining us pretty much every other meeting except for the first 2 months where we have 3 meetings per month with them. That would be May and June, and then it goes to 2 meetings per month in July and August, and in September as well. And then the schedule is attached to the end of the agreement, which we approve. There's a little block schedule there that shows how many meetings per month we anticipate, but we're not stuck with that. We can change it if we have to. Okay, so tonight, in talking to Mike, we thought we'd lead off with a real doozer, and that's the Committee of Precinct Chairs. Take a hard one first. And I synthesized the list of points which this commission had discussed over the past several weeks and came up with a list of, I think, 8 or 10 items, of which I sent them all to the commissioners last week. Actually, A through H. And including H was any additional powers as suggested by the charter commissioners. These are items which we're focusing as what the Committee of Precinct Chairs might be able to expand their portfolio and their capacity to handle. And that's where we are tonight. So let's go to it. And as we were reading this list, Mike, we had some questions back to you when we hit some of these points. But the first one was the enforcement of charter provisions. And I know you've been thinking about that, and you told me that that was what across the state is a big problem, enforcing charter provisions. But you had some very interesting takes on it, so go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, would it be okay if we also sort of backed up for a second on and talked a little generally about the Committee on Precinct Chairs before we dive into the A through H? Would that be okay?
Yes, certainly.
Okay. So as the chair alluded to, we do think this is a challenging first topic, but it's also a very interesting first topic. I think it's challenging because this type of committee is not very common, and Pat will tell you a little bit more about some research she just did into this. So there's not a lot as much to go on as there will be on other topics that we're going to come to by way of what others have been doing to draw from. This is an interesting topic, I think, because it's a really innovative way to adapt representative town meeting to an era that's posing increasingly, complicated challenges for local government and for legislative branches generally. So I'm happy that we're taking it because it started at the start because it's interesting. I will say we do, I think we'll have a lot more to say on some of the future topics than we have, at least in terms of what else is out there for this one. But to get into that, I'm going to turn it over to Pat, who's done some digging into the 30 or so other representative town meeting charters across the Commonwealth to see what else others are doing around that might be similar to your Committee of Precinct Chairs. Pat?
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Great. We're excited to be a part of this process as you consider changes to your charter. While the basic structure of representative town meeting remains the same across Massachusetts, each town has developed its own unique structures to support this form of government. With its Committee of Precinct Chairs, Plymouth has really created an advisory committee that is somewhat unique in Massachusetts. In most towns, the only role of precinct chairs is to chair precinct meetings to fill vacancies or vote on removing members. In fact, out of about 31 towns that have chosen representative town meeting, only about 4, including Plymouth, have established legislative committees that are comprised of precinct chairs. They each differ in their duties and functions. We thought it might be helpful tonight to briefly share some information about these 3 other town committees so you can get an idea of how other precinct committees are structured and what roles they play in the town's legislative branch. We found only one other town with a committee that's specifically named the Committee of Precinct Chairs. The town of Dedham has enacted its own community of precinct chairs, which are selected by each precinct's representatives. The official charges of the committee are to review the rules, procedures, and conduct of town meetings, and to make recommendations to the select board and to town meeting. However, in practice, this has played out in the past with precinct chairs hosting public forums called mini town meetings a couple weeks before town meeting. At these mini town meetings, warrant articles are presented and issues are discussed and vetted in preparation for formal town meetings. While Dedham is the only town with a similarly named committee of precinct chairs, 2 other towns convene committees that are made up of precinct chairs. The first is Reading, which is where the charter establishes a rules committee. The rules committee is chaired by the town moderator, who is a non-voting member, and it consists of precinct chairs with the charge of reviewing operational aspects of town meeting and proposing rules governing the conduct of town meeting. In practice, this rules committee meets relatively infrequently with the town the town moderator, to make suggestions specifically relating to how the town meeting is conducted. For example, the committee met to discuss the practical protocols for the emergency virtual town meetings that took place in 2020 and 21. The final committee that is made up of precinct chairs is the Committee on Rules in Stoughton. This committee is comprised of the town meeting moderator and each precinct chair. It's charged with referring warrant articles to the appropriate standing committees, so the committees can hold public hearings and make recommendations to town meeting. The Stoughton Committee also includes discussions about town meeting procedures, rules, and items like training for town meeting managers. Now, the Stoughton Committee on Rules as a body does not make appointments to legislative committees. However, the town meeting advisory committees do include members appointed by each precinct chair individually, although not as a body under the precinct chair committee. So while there are only a handful of established precinct chair committees in the state, several towns have found other ways to get precinct representatives more involved at the committee stage. In several towns, the charter requires town meeting to include 1 member per precinct on its advisory committees, such as FinCom. These members are either appointed by the moderator or by votes of the precinct or by the precinct chair or by some combination of these methods. So the town of Plymouth's Committee of Precinct Chairs really represents a unique legislative committee in both structure and in scope. We're looking forward to exploring with you how to best structure the committees such as this to meet the town's challenges. So I'll hand the presentation back to Mike to go through some of the challenges you're hoping to meet.
Can I have a question? Can I ask a question? So in your, so you're just covering, looking at other towns that may or may not have this, Dedham being one of it, and you just were looking at how Dedham does it. Did you see, when you look at Plymouth's precinct chairs, were you looking at that one specifically also?
Yes, I definitely took a look at what you're doing in Plymouth.
Right.
We thought we'd start out by just telling you a
Okay.
little bit about what precinct committees look like in other
Okay,
towns.
okay, good.
Because Plymouth
Okay,
is such a
got it.
unique community.
Yeah, yeah, I got it. It was, okay, very good, thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions on that before we?
I just want to say that was really helpful because we are definitely on new ground here in Plymouth and have been for a while. And so I think that knowing what all these other towns are attempting to do, and I particularly was interested in what you said about advisory and finance, that committee of precinct chairs the precinct chairs are involved in some towns with appointing some members to advisory and finance, because that's something that we have talked about here as well. So thank you, that was very thorough.
Okay. Mike, did you want to add something? It occurs to me that one observation is that Plymouth already is trying to do a lot more, it seems, than these other towns with their committees of precinct chairs. We have pretty ambitious thoughts here as to what we might be able to do with our committee of precinct chairs. We have it acting, it seems to me, in a more proactive manner than these other, perhaps Dedham kind of approaches it by treating it as a rules committee. But if you look at the things that we were proposing that the committee of precinct chairs might do, it's quite a list here in Plymouth. So we need your your reaction to that. Are we biting off more than we can chew? Is there anything here that we can't do? For example, if we take up each one, we have questions like what authority could the precinct chairs have to act in an emergency between town meetings, for example? Do they have any authority with respect to money, expenditures, in between town meetings? Unless there's been a declared emergency, where I understand how the select board operates if there's a declared emergency. But we want to see how far the boundaries go, certainly legally as well as practically. So that's a question. Bill, did you have a question you want to add to this?
No, I just wanted to, I'm sorry, just wanted to add to the, what we discussed was specifically around the idea that right now, that during an emergency between town meetings, if there needs to be an expenditure, they're going through the finance committee, and the finance committee is acting in that emergency capacity. There was some talk about could the precinct chairs, a duly elected committee, act in that capacity. Was that the thought, Bill? Was that what we were talking, is that what you?
Yeah, we talked with the director of finance. She wasn't quite sure how far we could push that, but we understood the procedure to be the select board would consult with the finance committee, which if necessary would go to DOR and get authority to act in between town meetings if there was an emergency, of which we've had them from time to time here in Plymouth. And other than that, we understand that there's a reserve fund that has been previously appropriated by town meeting that's sitting there, and that is available in between town meetings. But again, the finance committee seems to be in charge of it, and it's accessible to the finance director and the select board. So I think the question we had was whether the people could be more representative if the town meeting, through the committee of precinct chairs, basically the legislative branch, which have some process that would involve the, accessing funds, if necessary, in between town meetings to take advantage of an opportunity, for example. So that's the question.
So that one, I mean, we're going to have to convene our full team and do a pretty deep dive on that one, because as you alluded to, the finance committee traditionally and in state law has the control over the reserve fund that you were as you were talking about it. And I was actually just this morning, I was looking into I need to do more research into this. There is one precedent of a town that tried to create a committee. The charter, I don't believe, passed, or in fact, I know it didn't pass. But the town of Sharon in 2009 was working on creating a committee, sort of like your committee of precinct chairs, that would be able to take some action in between meetings. So I need to find out a little bit more about the specifics of what they were thinking and what Attorney General opinion, if any, came out about their proposed charter. So the short answer to that is because I don't know specifically how many others have tried this, there is going to have to be, we're going to have to do some more work to dig around on that one. Libby, you want to
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in quickly on this because I know that the committee has a very ambitious agenda in a very compressed time frame for this review process. So I'm wondering on an issue like this, what is the committee's concern? What are you trying to address here? That I know that special town meetings may seem cumbersome to call, but generally it can be done in a relatively short amount of time. So I'm wondering, when do you envision needing to use this? And like, for example, I think the speaker just said to take an advantage of an opportunity. So has this come up before? Has the town lost out on an opportunity that it wasn't able to take advantage of because you were unable to call a special town meeting and get the funding?
Yeah. So I think we were exploring this around a couple of examples. Here in Plymouth, we had a sewer line, and the sewer line broke, and we had to eventually get to town meeting to decide what to do on that, but they had to be emergency measures taken immediately. We've had issues where we've had declarations of emergency during a storm or something of that nature. That's one component of the discussion, and I know my fellow board members are going to want to add to this to give you some direction of what we're coming around to. But there's another part of the precinct chairs that we were looking at, is giving them some accountability when it comes to the actions of town meeting. Town meeting goes and they vote on articles, and articles pass town meeting, and then we all kind of cross our fingers and hopefully that article is executed in a timely manner. And we have seen examples where institutionally the town doesn't have any mechanism to assure that happens. And so articles have sat unattended after town meeting for a period of time, and that's been very frustrating to town meeting because we have debated the issue, we've allocated the money, and now we're sitting there waiting for it to be executed. So there's this thought of, is there something that the precinct chairs could do to give some sort of post-legislative oversight where town meeting, the precinct chairs are keeping track of the actions of the town meeting and the progress of these articles as they make their way through the normal processes of town hall, going to a department, getting assigned, going to procurement, putting out to bid, getting the contract signed, having the building committee executed. There are all sorts of things that are going on after town meeting, and I think that some of these things aren't getting done. So the thought was, could the precinct chairs have this type of oversight in some type of enforcement to it, not just simply, look, there it is, but actually making sure that some of these things happen. I know my fellow board members are going to have other examples, but that was something that we discussed at great lengths about the Committee of Precinct Chairs maybe assuming this responsibility in the future.
I think they're two separate functions. I mean, maybe they blend, but I thought what we were talking about is a front-end responsibility before the money is actually spent, when the need first arises,
Right.
that the Committee of Precinct Chairs, as certainly as an offshoot of town meeting, is closer to town meeting certainly than the Finance Committee is, because the Finance Committee being all appointed, that the Committee of Precinct Chairs would be expressing more a public need. I mean, it's certainly closer to the representatives, and the reason why we want to keep our town meeting. And they'd be acting at the front end to sort of bring aboard town meeting, who would ultimately then be asked to pass articles and so forth once it gets to town meeting. But the precinct chairs would be able to act first. And I think Bill also was then talking about the other end, the after it as a post-legislative follow-up to see, in fact, whether the monies did go where they were supposed to go and whether the project got done and the way it was supposed to be done and the way town meeting thought it would be done. I mean, there's two aspects here. And I'm wondering whether the Committee of Precinct Chairs basically has a role at both ends, both the beginning and also in the post-legislatively.
Mr. Chairman,
Let's see, down this end, wrestling?
Yeah, I just think that the general statement that we need to look at is we had a big discussion about, whether we should keep town meeting or whether we should go with the council. And one of the major parts of that was that the public is demanding something that has an entity and has responsibility throughout the year. Where town meeting meets twice a year, you know, and articles like Bill said, you know, are, you know, money's expended and there's nobody from that legislative branch that has any powers. And I don't want to use the word power, but I want to use the word responsibility. So I think we're really looking to the committee of precinct chairs as being a voice of town meeting in between those town meetings, whether it comes from, you know, before articles or after articles. But I think that, you know, we were really looking to give more responsibility to the precinct chairs so that they can be that voice throughout the year in between town meetings, because what came out of, you know, creating this charter is that, you know, Plymouth really needs a proactive, more involved legislative branch that is involved throughout the year, not just twice a year. So it was, I think this is where we're trying to go, you know, to give you the basis of what we were talking about.
Larry, and then Betsy.
Okay.
I have been town clerk for over a quarter century, finally almost escaped. The emergencies that you talk about, they come in, as far as I can tell, a few different levels. There is the big emergency, and I think the sewer break was the example of that. It ended up costing something on the order of $48 million. And it seems to me that town meetings' role in that was after the emergency was dealt with. There is a state mandate of how you deal with those emergencies. The finance director and the select board seem to have that control. Then there are the smaller emergencies. The reserve fund is, I forget, 150 or 250, one of those. $150,000. So those are small emergencies. You know, a voting machine fails and you need a new one without the opportunity to go to town meeting. Not much of a problem dealing with that. The medium-sized emergencies, we seem to be dealing with historically anyway. Budgets they come in two parts, personnel and other. And in much of the year, if there's an emergency, you can transfer from one of the smaller line items into another line item without going through any sort of serious discussion. I think, you know, you might want to tell the town manager you're planning to do that. But those monies are available temporarily to be replenished by some means. So as far as I can tell, those are most of the emergencies. And to give the final example, the town has an opportunity for a purchase, and for the first time in, I don't know, 5 years maybe, we've called a special town meeting. We usually have a special as part of the annual, but it really is just part of the annual town meeting. This is a set-aside special town meeting, so a final way of dealing with an emergency is a special town meeting. Very unusual in Plymouth, and in fact, my understanding is that the DOR and their local people don't like the idea of having a whole lot of special town meetings. They see it as basically a lack of planning. But it is a tool available to us. So that's how we're dealing with emergencies now, and I think that the question before the Charter Commission is that how we should continue to deal with that. There are differing opinions, and we'll come to a decision at some point.
Betsy?
I was looking again at your A through H recommendations, Bill, that we've discussed in the past, and it would be my suggestion that we start with A, discuss it, go to B, we're kind of jumping in the middle with E and C, and we're kind of going back and forth, and it might be more helpful to go one by one, and maybe even before we start that process, we might want to prioritize out of A through H, are E and C the most important, and talk about them first.
It's a good idea, I think, Betsy. Why don't we, can we, Mike, maybe just take that list and see how, proceed through it?
Absolutely, but Mr. Chairman, can I offer one other idea as well before we begin? These are very helpful comments in helping us understand and frame up kind of what's going on. It strikes me that and in I think elsewhere in that same email, you had noted that there seems to be two different things you are hoping to do throughout these A through H. One is to clarify the existing powers of the committee, and one is to add new powers. I believe, if my understanding is correct, that when the initial charter was, this section was drafted initially in this charter, it was left a little bit vague because it was innovative, it was new, you wanted to see kind of where it would go. So before we get into A through H, I'm wondering, would it be useful for would this commission be interested in us trying to develop some language, a new subsection that would specify not just the powers, but what's the role of this committee? Because you've got a bunch of really good ideas and a bunch of really important things you're trying to do with it, and sort of rather than kind of tack them all on, with further subsections, without kind of the overarching structure, would it be useful to kind of start and say a new subsection, the committee of precinct chairs shall, and then 1, 2, 3, whatever you want the role to encompass. And then we can, after that's complete, we can, or if you're interested in that, we can work on it between meetings, but then we can get into, okay, so now we know what the role is, A, B, and C. So what powers can we clarify, and what powers new do we want to add to achieve that role and function?
Okay. Anybody want to field that one?
So,
I like that.
Yes, I would.
Betsy?
So, Mike, are you suggesting that you would do that at our next meeting? Is that what you're saying? You'll come back with suggestions at our next meeting and then go through A through H? Is that what you're suggesting? I'm not sure.
Well, no, so I guess what I would suggest is if we took a few minutes now and tried to flesh out what the commission would want to include in the role, then between now and the next meeting, we can come up with some language. But after we've got a couple of thoughts from the commission on what you want in the role, then we can start to at least tackle A through H in this meeting here.
I think that's a really good idea to look at what we have. So I really applaud you for that suggestion. So you're saying you would look at what we have, and also tonight we would add in the A through H so that you could look at the whole thing as a package. Is that what you're saying?
Pretty much, yeah. So what I would suggest is if to start, we thought if the commission was interested in it, we would add a new section, and I don't know if it would be 235 or 234A, and the committee of precinct chairs shall. And then we'd want to hear from the commission, what would you want included? What would you want the public to know? How would you want the charter to describe what is the role, what is the function, what is the mission of this committee? And then the sub-pieces would fall after that, once you decided what, so for example, we're talking about, the follow-up oversight of the charter. And I think when our team was talking about this earlier, Libby had an idea about what if there was four reports a year, 4 meetings a year to update the full town meeting and others on what warrant articles from the prior meetings hadn't been fulfilled yet. So that's just an example, but whatever the actual specifics are, but to start out, so let me give another example. If you go to the select board section of your charter, it's very clear right at the front, the select board is the head of the executive branch. Boom. Everyone knows, in theory, that is what the select board is supposed to do. So, but with the committee of precinct chairs, it's kind of left to reverse engineer right now from the duties listed in 234, what the overall purpose is. But we've already heard some great thoughts tonight and in those emails that, and the idea of a legislative oversight function, like that seems to be one of the purposes.
Yeah,
The
Mike.
idea of providing continuity to the legislative branch in between town meetings, that could be part of its described mission, so that people are clear about what it's trying to do, and which then, once you figure out what tools you want to give it, that they'll follow from that mission.
Okay, Mike, let me just make a couple comments about what it seems to me, why I think it's important. And then others here can add their view of it. I view the Committee of Precinct Chairs as a legislative function. It's an outgrowth of the town meeting. It's formed by precinct chairs of town meeting members. So we're talking legislative branch as opposed to and contrasted with the executive branch. So it's really, part of it is checks and balances, but this is the legislative branch asserting its power. I do think it's the government closest to the people, and it's being heard in a number of respects representative of the people in all our precincts, all 18 of the precincts. And these other functions, the specifics that we've given you a list, are an outgrowth of that relationship. And when they speak, they're speaking as a co-equal branch of the government. They speak to the select board. They're going to speak to the administrative departments through the town manager. So, I mean, they are representative and instrumental on the legislative side. And the list of items that we gave you, those 6 or 7 things, flow from that. Because right now, the town meeting is kind of like out there by itself, doesn't really have any access to the select board, any direct connection, and they're just not functioning together. And the Committee of Precinct Chairs, we thought, would bridge that gap. Some thought it could act kind of like a council. Of course, a council has both executive and legislative authority all wrapped up in one. But here's a body that can meet as often as necessary. It's always there. Can meet in between town meetings. I mean, that's kind of the thought I had about this committee.
Yeah, I'm just going to throw in what I said at the last meeting. I see it, can you hear me still?
Yes, very good.
As the executive committee of town meeting. So it's by meeting more frequently, everything Bill's saying is, I'm in support of, but it really is, it's, instead of the 162 that we're heading toward, it is the 18 people who meet more frequently, who we will, clarify and assign responsibilities. But they are the town meeting present between town meetings and leading up to town meetings.
Right. The only thing about that, David, is using the word executive and referring to the executive committee is a little bit, some people might get a little confused.
Okay, steering committee, I mean, we could come up with a different name.
Sure,
but-
right, yep.
Or we could change the name from committee or committee to council of
Right.
precinct chairs.
Right. Larry.
I think I want to just emphasize what you brought out. There needs to be a definition at the beginning of the Committee of Precinct Chairs. I looked at the charter, which I had typographical control over back when. The Committee of Precinct Chairs just kind of fades in there. I think we need to say the Committee of Precinct Chairs is and functions as, and have the first paragraph that, and then this A through H as we determine what's important. But the first statement is going to make people sit up and notice the Committee of Precinct Chairs as opposed to the way it is now. It just kind of fades into the charter.
Okay. Betsy.
I'd like to give you an example of something that was shocking for me. This town meeting, our town meeting, voted to install some veteran housing on Long Pond Road. And there were elaborate drawings, and these houses were going to be put along the road. And when I went with several people from town to look at what was happening, an enormous amount of open space had been destroyed. I mean, all these trees had been cut down, and these houses were in a different place than they were on the drawings, and there were less houses, and, I mean, we had voted on a very specific plan. So I went across directly to the town, and I said, well, how could this happen? They said, the town meeting only votes on what's in the warrant article. All of the explanations are not binding. I was shocked. I'm so, well, why did we get all those drawings? Well, that's what we were thinking we would do, but when it came down to doing it, we decided to do it differently. And I'm talking like maybe a quarter of a mile, a half a mile of open space, 20 feet, 25 feet wide, resulted, though it was destroyed. And as the chairman of the Open Space Committee at the time, I was like, this could not happen. So this is the kind of legislative oversight and relationship that I particularly want. If we vote as town meeting members on a plan that's very specifically added to our warrant, I want the town, the executive branch, to come back to town meeting and say, we're not going to do it that way. We're going to take out, 2 acres of open space. We're going to cut down all those trees. Then I can vote again, because I've certainly voted for that project, but I wouldn't have voted for it if I had known how it was going to come out. So I think that we need that kind of legislative oversight. We need to be able to know when we vote for something, it's what's going to happen. And there are other examples in terms of finances when we vote for something financially and then it doesn't happen or it doesn't happen that way. And I don't think that that leads to a relationship of trust between the executive branch and the legislative branch. And I think that trust is very important. And I think this is a place where the Committee of Precinct Chairs could be apprised of changes or what needs to be done or whatever. And then that can perhaps come back to town meeting or perhaps not. But this kind of shock that I had was the kind of thing that we get typically less of, but we still get these little shocks like, oh, they didn't do it what they said they were going to do, or they didn't do it the way they said they were going to do it. So thank you.
So it's interesting, Betsy, because what I've learned with the community preservation articles that we send forward, that I've done it enough to learn that I got this warrant. It opens up. It's the Board of Selectmen's warrant. We have articles. We draft them and write them, and then we put them on the warrant. And FinCom and Selectmen and caucuses and town meeting. Well, FinCom and the caucuses review it. By the time it gets to town meeting, it's now acting on the actual motions. That's what we're voting on. But the article still retains some of its, it retains its description. Because I've been in a room where after a town meeting, and they're like, what did the warrant say? Okay, what did the article say? The warrant is superseding the article. But I've learned, put it in the article. Put it in the article. If you looked at spring town meeting, Stevensfield went in there with a plan that if that plan changes, they have to go back to the committee. But if you can write an article and describe the situation in the article where you were giving this money to build you this veterans housing based on this plan you gave us at this location, any changes you'd have to come back to, like the Committee of Precinct Chairs. So I think to solve the dilemma that you're experiencing, I've experienced it numerous times, and I've found the way out of that circumstance is put it in the article.
Recommending that if it's not in the article, we put an amendment in that they have to
Yeah,
go
you
back
could
to
put
town
amendment.
meeting?
You could put
Okay.
amendment in there.
All right.
Okay. Any comments, observations?
Mr. Chairman, I think I heard in there from at least one commenter that there is some interest on the commission in a new potential sub-bullet there that would, start something to the effect of the Committee of Precinct Chairs is or shall be or shall function as, and then carving out whatever you want the mission of that committee to be. And I hear at least 4 pieces of it, and I'd like to make sure I've captured them correctly. There's follow-up oversight from the legislative branch's perspective on decisions that have been made at town meeting. there's continuity to the legislative branch between town meetings, so that the public has someone they can go to, so that there is some continuing discussion going on, even when town meeting itself is not in session. And then from the existing text, there's also facilitation of town meeting rules, procedures, and so forth, and then review of bylaws. If we were to draft some language that created a mission statement or a statement of function or purpose for the Committee of Precinct Chairs and included some, wording to be determined, but something along those lines, would that be of interest to the commission? And if so, did we leave anything out of this initial list?
Mr. Chairman,
Frank?
one of the things that I think has been left out is a general issue of the the Committee of Precinct Chairs' authority, that it needs to be stated in the charter that they have a certain authority, and that has to translate into being able to be heard. Because one of the things I think you've heard overall is town meeting happens like a door opens, and there they are live, and they do their thing, and then it shuts, and it's as if they don't exist anymore. Now, there have been recent occasions where the Committee of Precinct Chairs has asked to be heard as a group to make statements about actualities happening in the town, wanting to be heard on that, and they haven't had in the documents, in the charter, or in the minds of other boards, the authority to be heard when they ask to. They need to have that authority. They need to be able to be heard. They need to perhaps, as you talked about meetings 4 times a year, to appraise people about the status of warrant articles, they need to have meetings perhaps always 4 times a year with the select board, and/or to be able to demand a hearing, be able to be heard before the select board. So if we're going to put them on the level we want them on, they can't just be in a vacuum there. They have to be able to be heard by the select board. That's my opinion, at least, and I think it's something we want.
Larry?
The one other piece that I would put in the basic definition is charter enforcement. Someone needs to have an ongoing oversight of when the charter is functioning as it should and when it's being ignored, in between charter writings, which can be 5, 10 years separate.
Mike, I think your approach sounded good. The statement, starting off, the Committee of Precinct Chairs is, and if you look at the list, actually, after you develop that into a lead-in paragraph, these specific functions sort of follow, many of them, in terms of what we already said here, the things we didn't discuss so far, but make a share of making appointments. I mean, that's another item. I don't think that should be controversial. And interaction with the Finance Committee. You'll see these other things here seem to follow from your basic opening statement of the function of the Committee of Precinct Chairs.
And I think
Wrestling?
Yeah, I think that the dance that we have to look at is, I've been very trying not to use the word power, but I think Frank, eloquently said it, we need to, they need to have some authority, right? Better word than I think we're, talking about giving them responsibility, they've got to be, and to Frank's point, I was one of the members of the precinct chairs who went before the selectmen, and basically the chair of the selectmen said, well, you're just an advisory group. I don't know why you're getting up all upset about this. And I think that the Committee of Precinct Chairs really needs to be that voice of town meeting, because, like you said, Bill, the Committee of Precinct Chairs is the closest to the populace, because they're made up of town meeting members, which are the populace, basically. And I think that's where we're having the most trouble, or the hardest thing for us to do is find a way to give authority to the precinct chairs without taking, the executive power away from the executive branch. And it needs to have some oomph to it, because if we're going to give these responsibilities to community precinct chairs, we need to have some sort of, you know, authority.
Yeah. I think you use the right word when you say responsibility
Yes.
or enforcement. About issues, as Bill, the chairman, says, that town meeting has this, town meeting is in session, it takes these actions, it's a legislative body, and they need to have some legislative oversight, and they need to have some skin in the game, and they need to be able to walk in the room and say, this is what we want to see commence in a certain frame of time. But we do not want to encroach on other branches of the government in their authority. Their powers are separate. It's a form of checks and balances, but we do find that the precinct chairs are something that we've had around now for 25 years?
2005.
2005, 15 years. So they're starting to mature into something. We're seeing opportunities to give them more responsibility, give them some accountability, and some enforcement to activities associated with town meeting in terms of its execution of those responsibilities.
Just quickly, would it be appropriate to say that the Charter Commission is the administrative branch of town meeting?
Should be the precinct chair.
I mean, the Committee of Precinct Chairs, I'm sorry, is the, I don't even know what I just said. The Committee of Precinct Chairs is the administrative branch of town meeting. No, not administrative, you don't like it? Okay.
So you see, Mike, we're grappling with the definitions, but I think we've actually, our thinking has evolved tonight, just in this last half hour. So this has been very helpful.
Good. I think we've got enough to give you, you know, take a first stab between now and the next meeting at constructing a mission statement paragraph or a function statement paragraph for this committee that includes these items. So now I think that's a good segue into this A through H in little more detail here to try and flesh out, and also to, you know, to say, I need, you know, to be a little honest up front. I think, you know, some of the goals that I think you're trying to achieve in A are achievable, and some of them I think, you know, unfortunately, there's just not going to be as much as some may want to provide some of the type of authority you're looking for. When, you know, and we can talk about it as we go through, because in some cases, you know, what you may be trying to solve for is not necessarily as much of a charter problem as a current political problem or a recurring political problem. And so, you know, we can try and tease that out and figure out where can we establish more authority for this committee and for the legislative without encroaching on the executive, and where, you know, unfortunately, does it sort of the road end at political accountability. So to start off, you know, actually, so A is actually maybe one of the toughest of the whole group to start off on enforcement. I took a spin through quite a few charters, cities and towns, you know, all different forms across Massachusetts, just looking for who's come up with innovative ideas, if any, about enforcement of charter. Because I'm sure, well, I know for a fact that that other towns and other municipalities grapple with enforcement of charters. As you mentioned in A explicitly, the master plan, that's a very common one. You know, I can't tell you how many municipalities we've worked with where a detailed and well put together master plan is constructed and then mostly ignored. It's unfortunate, but we see it a lot. What I can give you a couple examples of little things that I've seen, and I can send you the text between the meetings. The town of Falmouth has worked out a detailed procedure in its charter, which involves the person who is determined that he or she thinks there is a failure to heed the charter can file a complaint with the clerk. Then it provides a process for the responding governmental entity to respond, and then the person can respond again. at the end of the day, though, it's still not entirely clear, what additional mechanisms that brings to bear, other than it raises the issue substantially and provides potentially, by calling attention to it, some more ways to get it solved. And then the only other one that I had seen beyond the text that all charters have about the role of the town manager or select board or mayor in the cases, cities with mayors, their enforcement roles. The town of Orleans has a provision where 10 voters can request the Board of Selectmen ask town council to issue an opinion on whether the charter is being followed. Beyond that, I have not seen significant examples where there are enforcement provisions built into the charter. And my hypothesis as to why is that at the end of the day, a lot of that does become a political issue. So the charter provision is not being followed. And again, giving additional tools to raise the temperature of that, or to raise the volume of that there is a problem, and leaving it to the voters to concur or not that the problem merits changing out whoever the elected officials are that are not following through.
Mike,
So
just
having-
one question on the Mike, a question on the enforcement. Would it make sense to try to put the accountability and the responsibility in the town manager as the head of our government to, when he or she hears or it's brought to their attention that there's been a violation of the charter, to basically step in and if they look at the facts, based on facts, whether if it's true, that they will take appropriate action?
I think it's clear that, in many ways, it's clear that the charter is not a self-enforcing document. And, where provisions are being ignored, it may or may not be seen as political, especially if it's someone who isn't elected. So I know that a previous town manager did make a public statement in front of the Board of Selectmen that when an article passes town meeting, that if it was that town manager's decision not to assign it to a department and not to take action, it would just stay there and it wouldn't move. And in the final analysis, it was determined that it was up to the town manager and the Board of Selectmen whether these decisions by the legislative branch would be executed. It was kind of like a second bite at the apple. It was something, one could label it political, but again, it seems to have been a problem on articles that just don't warrant the level of attention. So it's kind of like trying to establish a canary in the coal mine where these articles have been passed by town meeting, they're sitting there, money's been allocated, and they're being either forgotten or deliberately ignored. We were just trying to think of a way, where could we get a canary in the coal mine to find an entity that was dedicated to looking at this matter of legislative oversight, and if something wasn't being done, what could we do, and what could the committee of precinct chair, could it be the committee of precinct chairs that has that responsibility?
So I think Libby from our team had some thoughts and ideas on one, reporting mechanism at least. So at least the information is all being raised and put together in a way that might help. So Libby.
Thank you. One of the things that I think we keep going back and forth on, and without realizing the difference, are making a distinction. And I think I do see a distinction there, is one, enforcement of the charter, and the second being an item that's a few spaces down the list, which is enforcement or oversight of town meeting warrant articles that are passed. And they're two different things. When we look at enforcement of the charter, while the process for looking at both of those things might be similar, I think the issue of whether the charter is being violated that has more, not more serious consequences, but has the charter is like a law. It's a foundational process document, right? So Mike's suggestion, or not suggestion, but what he had said about Falmouth, I think it was Falmouth that you said, Mike, that 10 taxpayers could petition to say whether or not the charter has been violated. I mean, that's a really interesting enforcement or accountability tool. Now, when we think about the Committee of Precincts Chair's role in this, I think some of what the committee has said, has brought forward so far about being mindful of the branches of government, right? Because when you have the charter, you really have an executive function in enforcing parts of the charter. Because creates a process for government, and it creates an operational function. And generally, operational functions are overseen by the executive branch of the government. So in order to be respectful of that, what can we do with the Committee of Precinct Chairs, and how would we approach that? I think it's a difficult topic for the Committee of Precinct Chairs to look at. If we walk through it and we think about logically what, and I'm just referring to A now, we're talking about a charter violation or an alleged charter violation, the resources it would take for the Committee of Precinct Chairs to conduct an investigation into whether or not a charter provision is being complied with would be extensive, and I think beyond what is available to the Committee for Precinct Chairs. And a side concern about that is the issue of employee performance, who the employee is reporting to, and how that performance is managed. Because once we start talking about you're not complying with this foundational process for our government procedure, we're looking at performance. Some employee, whether it's most likely a department head, there's going to be an allegation that that person is not following a process set forward in a charter. And to be respectful of the employee, to be respectful of the supervisor and the appointing authority relationship there, I think we need to be mindful of the executive branch authority. So those are just some considerations when we look at enforcement of charter provisions and we think about, okay, we have a complaint being made. The complaint is that the charter is not being followed. What is the logical next step for that? Where do we put the enforcement authority? Where do we put the investigation? Who's the next person to handle this issue? So that's something I would like just to throw out there for consideration. Yeah. And again, bouncing it back to the town manager, who's the executive branch, that might be something that's appropriate. When we get to the part, when we get a few sections down where we're talking about enforcement or oversight of warrant articles, I think we might have some creative ideas for that as well. But I'm just limiting this to the charter provisions, which again is an operational process document that you're going to get into thinking about, are the department heads following this? Is the proper procedure being followed? And what are the ramifications on that? And we want to be respectful of employees. We want to be respectful of the executive branch authority. So perhaps passing that on to the town manager and creating a process for doing that might be the role of this charter review, is creating that process for passing that on to the executive branch.
Excellent observations on the sense that that charter enforcement really doesn't fall under. It doesn't make a lot. It's not terribly rational to have it under Committee of Precinct Chairs. That you would have to do charter enforcement somewhere, whether you either had a charter enforcement committee or had some other mechanism for that. I understand that. That's a good observation. When it comes to the legislative oversight component of town meeting takes action, there's an article, who's going to be responsible to execute that? I don't want to micromanage any department. I don't think that's what we're saying. I think we're gravitating towards this idea of town meetings taking action on an article. how do we build some level of accountability or some sort of responsibility by the committee of precinct chairs to make sure that that article is known that it's there or should be executed?
Well, we're still not, what the point I take from her as most salient is that the two are very separate.
Yes.
And we're not,
No.
we're talking about A now, which is the
Yeah.
enforcement of the charter.
Right.
I'm on the planning board in town, and I want to make the point that the charter is not diverted from by a staff person. The charter is not diverted by, or abrogated or disregarded by a developer. The charter most likely is not enforced or adhered to by those executive board members. The select board and the planning board are both executive boards. And they have the responsibility, as I understand it, as a planning board member, to implement the charter and the master plan and those underlying foundational documents. And I would really like a way for those boards and any others that might, be involved in things that affect the charter, to be held accountable for that in some public way. For example, we receive documents all the time, kind of pre-written by our staff about developments we're supposed to review. They don't say anything about, does this meet the charter? Does this meet the master plan? Does this meet specific regulations within our bylaws, our zoning bylaws? I'm wondering if that could be something that could be within a requirement that documents reference these things, kind of holding people accountable for these issues that are often just disregarded or forgotten, or people are complacent about. Whatever the reason they don't happen, they don't happen. We have many good regulations in this town, in my opinion, that are simply not adhered to, enforced, or acknowledged on a regular basis. So I particularly, it's my personal view, not necessarily this group at all, but I think that we need to have a way that's more out there, more clear, that is our mission. And as I understand it too, most of the things I've read about the role of the planning board is an executive function to implement the master plan in the long-range planning. And I'm not sure, for whatever reason, that is happening, maybe across the state. I don't know.
Yeah, so Frank, it was a nice observation where the charter enforcement really isn't in the realm of the committee of precinct chairs. They should focus on legislative oversight. But this idea of charter commission, charter enforcement, shouldn't there be an independent committee that anyone can go to make this concern known that an aspect of the charter is not being enforced? Is there some entity that would fill in that gap?
May I speak? Bill? I have two questions. One, the plan where 10 registered voters or whatever it was could ask for a review by town council if the charter is not being enforced properly. Couldn't that be a function of the committee of precinct chairs? A majority vote of the committee of precinct chairs could request that the select board consult with town council, because the committee of precinct chairs probably would be the most knowledgeable about the charter and about town meeting. And the second question is if the executive branch is not enforcing the charter, is that an ethics violation?
The second one is interesting. I'd have to think that through. But your first one is, I think, is a very interesting idea. Let's see if I can find the chat here. I'm going to paste. It's actually Orleans, the text, some text from their charter, on which is what I've been referring to here. Let me just see here. Okay, I've pasted that into the chat there, so you can see. It's not a very long text. But it says 10 or more voters shall have the right to petition the Board of Selectmen for enforcement of the charter, obtain a formal opinion from town council regarding any charter enforcement issue. So maybe it's something like that, as you said, that that the COPC, the Committee on Precinct Chairs, could also have that same right. I don't know. I'd want to think that through before and saying it's an interesting idea, but before I say more than that, I'd want to certainly chew it over a little bit and discuss it as a team. But you can see what Orleans did there, and I can. Falmouth is too long to paste in the chat, but I will send it to you before the next meeting to look at. We'll include that in our memo. Libby, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, so just reading that language that's in the chat, the Committee of Precinct Chairs would be 10 or more voters, right? So what you'd be doing is you'd be taking this type of language and you'd actually be narrowing it. And you'd be saying this language would encompass the Committee of Precinct Chairs and allow them to make a petition to the Board of Selectmen. But what you'd be saying is that it's not 10 or more voters, it's only the Committee of Precinct Chairs. So it would be a little bit more restrictive than the language that is in the Orleans that's been posted in the chat. A broader scope would allow any voters, like 10 or more voters, without restriction, that they be a member of the Committee of Precinct Chairs. That's just a consideration as we go through this language. And the other point I'd like to make about the second point, which is the ethics violation. Ethics violations often have to do with intent or motive. And so, for example, if someone was not enforcing a specific provision of the charter because it involved a relative or it involved some other type of familial relation, then you could see an ethics violation. But that's something that's so specific that really is a question for your town council or the ethics commission themselves. They're very responsive and you can always reach out to them to get an answer. But I think to make a broad statement, like any failure to enforce a charter would be an ethics violation, would probably not be a fair statement to make. It would be very circumstance and fact dependent.
An oath to enforce the charter?
That would be an ethics violation specifically, would be fact dependent.
If they take an oath to enforce the charter and then they don't enforce it, what kind of a violation is that?
That's more of a violation of your duties to your voters and who you represent. A lot, some of the communities that have struggled with this isn't it isn't an issue that's novel to Plymouth. One way to look at it is that we rely on our elected officials, and the process for holding them accountable is at the polls. And that's not a fast answer, and it's not an answer that many people like to hear, but often it is the answer in most communities. In terms of it being an ethics violation, ethics usually has to do with a certain type of relationship that someone has or a motivation that they have. So just the fact that you violated an oath, I don't know in itself would be enough to create that violation. But I think it's, if you have a question, the Ethics Commission is very accessible, very responsive, and also your town council might be able to help you out with that.
Mr. Chairman, if I could follow up and just ask the question, it comes back to, you mentioned a couple other towns having the precinct chairs sort of serve as a rules committee. In our A, we mentioned conflict of interest enforcement. Now, I'm curious what other towns do. We occasionally have a perceived conflict of interest by a town meeting member, and it may even be brought up by other town meeting members, but there's some degree of legislative protection for town meeting members in voting on things. So how do other towns deal with that? Is that sit with a moderator, or is that sit with others when you're talking about that part of charter enforcement?
My initial reaction to that is I think Plymouth is rare among municipalities that have its own conflict of interests provision in the charter. It's typically state law that where conflict of interest comes up. So you're already, you know, ahead of the curve, I guess, in having it in there at all, I would say, compared to many places. But yeah, we can look into.
Well, I guess what my question is, yes, it's there. I'm proud of the town for having it in our charter, but it is not consistently enforced, is the perception of many citizens. So it is there, but, you know, there's been instances of, you know, near flagrancy for one or more people voting despite an apparent conflict of interest. And what would happen if, do 10 citizens then need to report it? And it just, you know, that's why I'm wondering within town meeting itself, whether the moderator is supposed to do it or, you know, how other towns enforce that if they do.
And we can take a look and see what we can find on that, but that'll be an interesting one. With the rules making function is an interesting way to think about it too. Because if it's internal to town meeting, it seems to sit more squarely with a function that this committee might have. Libby or Pat, do you have anything further on that?
Am I muted? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I'm sorry, my computer is just doing something a little funky, but I was trying to pull up the language that's in the charter. I don't have the charter right in front of me at this moment, but I think the way that most places refer to it, because there can be some substantial penalties if we're referring to the conflict of interest law that's in, I don't know if there's a separate provision that's established by the Plymouth Charter, but if it's in reference to the MGL, there are specific penalties that can be invoked that are pretty substantial for flagrant violations of conflicts of interest. So I think that most communities, when they suspect a conflict of interest, they refer it to the Ethics Commission.
Okay. Thank you.
And can I just add, in many communities also, it is the town moderator who does enforce it, but oftentimes just by merely disclosing the conflict of interest when the town meeting member speaks, that's often enough to satisfy the requirement. For example, saying that you have an interest in something before you speak about it. That's sometimes how it's enforced also.
Larry?
Let me go a little bit sideways. It would seem to me that somewhere in the charter, there should be a statement that, yeah, we're serious. You know, someone should be looking at this, and if it's not the committee of precinct chairs, perhaps you might have a suggestion as to who is going to say, when someone, and I understand Frank's comment that the person violating the charter being put in charge of looking at the charter is a problem, but it's better than nothing. And right now, there really isn't anything in the charter that says someone should be looking at this. And the light of day is a useful tool. If you come out and say someone is violating the charter, there's at least a tendency to stop. So if you had a suggestion, if not the committee of precinct chairs, I'd like to know at some point, not this second, where it might appear. Thank you.
So I think we've got a lot of information and thoughts here on A. What we can do is cobble together the examples that we've mentioned, as well as some other potential thoughts and ideas, and hopefully give you something to chew on with for A here. Given the link, is it, Mr. Chairman, would it be okay if we skipped B and jumped to C since they're related and we've already touched on them quite a bit?
Yes, go right ahead.
So since, you know, we've kind of been dabbling in and out of C in the discussion of A. I think, Libby, I think you had an idea about one potential way we could construct a reporting mechanism to give some oomph to C, which would be I think a good role for this committee to have a part of.
So one of the things that I had thought of that might work for Plymouth is if you had, and you could call it, you know, whatever you wanted to, but for the sake of tonight, let's just call it an oversight subcommittee. And you can have an oversight subcommittee that's constructed of, and again, I'm just spitballing ideas here, but it could be a board of selectmen member. It could include the town manager. It could be maybe 3 members of the committee of precinct chairs. And you can create a process for oversight of town meeting warrant articles where this subcommittee could meet, you know, let's say quarterly or, you know, you could have them meet 4 times a year, 3 times a year, whatever you find to be most effective. And the purpose of this subcommittee could be to follow up and check in with departments about the status of warrant articles and make a report regarding that. So that creates some type of oversight, some type of check-in, and some type of accountability for department heads, for the executive branch, where the legislative branch and the executive branch are both involved. So that's just one way that you could do that.
I had shared with the Charter Commission and others this concept of legislative tracking, where we have a spreadsheet, and it has each town meeting and each article. And there are different boxes that you have to check to say that this thing has gone out to bid, or the RFP is written, or it's with the building committee, or it's fully executed, or every so many months, the sponsor of that article, who drafted it and put it before the for the town meeting, would be required to go in and fill out these simple boxes to tell us the status of this article. And this document could be seen by anyone, and could act as that canary in the coal mine, the idea of some sort of legislating tracking responsibility of the town, but making it not so that it's so burdensome that the little committee that's assigned to do this 4 times a year is overwhelmed by the task of tracking all this, that we put some of the ownership in the sponsors of these articles, that they would be responsible to put this information into the system, whether it's some sort of shared Google Doc that you go in and you place as the sponsor, you have access to it to put the information in there. It's something that I had been working on and had run by different departments at different points, because they were very concerned about legislative tracking and what type of burden that would put on their departments to keep such a information in place. So that's when I started experimenting with this idea of a self-populating Google Doc that people would have access to go in 4 times a year to update the status of that article. Like I would be required to go in and put in the information about Stevens Field, where are we? And so it was just something I was playing around with. I'd make it available to you if you wanted to see the thoughts that I had, that I shared with this committee. But it's just some way of tackling that without overwhelm. I think one of the things that we get into trouble with is overwhelming boards and committees and departments with layering more and more responsibility and work, when we should be thinking about trying to be efficient with our time and try to find ways to free up staff so they can get to the work at hand and not be bogged down by some other detail.
Yeah, just towards that, David Gould shared with me, he's got a spreadsheet for everything he does.
Right.
And I said, David, this is, you know, what we're looking at. When we were talking about that Legislative Oversight Committee originally, David shared that with me, and that's, you know, something I think that, you know,
Yeah.
we've got to take control of our,
Yeah, David is doing that internally for
Yeah.
his own individual department.
Yes.
That's just the nature of David, but
Yeah.
we need to build on that across
yes.
the town.
Yeah,
So
Definitely.
Mike, is this a good place to make a break? I think we made a good progress through the list and through the whole idea of the committee of precinct chairs. Do you want to take it from here and then work this coming week on some, at least
Yeah.
maybe a preliminary draft of a provision?
Yeah, we've got a couple pieces we will put together here. We'll put together the leading in paragraph, the new subsection with the potential mission for you to look at. We'll work up something for A and something for C, I think, as a start point. If we can get to some of the others, even though we don't have anything from the discussion, we have at least the bullets, so we can, see what we can put together with those two. I think this has been very helpful. We really appreciate it, and we'll also talk as a team together and kind of think about what we glean now from the dynamics of the commission that we can use to help ensure that we're moving this along as effectively, efficiently as possible. We appreciate it. It was a good discussion. A lot of really great points. So, thank you.
Been really stimulating to be working with you now. We're all on the same page here. It seems like we're really beginning to make progress towards an actual document that we're going to be presenting here in a few months. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. So I
Thank
think
you.
according to our schedule, we will see what next in, is it 2 weeks, May 9th?
Well, why don't you and I have a discussion, in the next day or two, to figure out what makes the most sense in terms of next meeting on this topic, if that's all right.
Thank you very much tonight, and so we'll go on with our agenda. We appreciate your coming and look forward to the next time we get together.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
So right now, let's take public comment. So we have Mr. Hutchinson here, charter aficionado.
Thank you. Precinct 12 and/or 17. I wanted to just make a comment along the way about the practical considerations for the Committee of Precinct Chairs and any of the kinds of powers that you're talking about assigning to it. And I wouldn't hesitate at all to use the word powers. I think that's what we're talking about. So just quick note on that. I think of the COPC as a creature of the legislature, and with all of its strengths and weaknesses. I'd look at town meeting members running as a candidate for being a member of the COPC. Is that how you do that? What are the practical considerations for recruiting town meeting members? I'm in the middle of trying to fill out the roster for Precinct 17, and some of those folks won't have any depth at all. They won't have the skills, they won't have the time and grade, they won't have the depth of knowledge, for example, of the master plan. I mean, they won't understand that there needs to be a connection between, well, that in fact the select board and the town manager need to be responsible for executing pieces of that planning board, or of the master plan. So there are considerations like that of the set of skills, the amount of time, and the depth of knowledge that you are working with when you create a body like this that's going to have a lot of power, is what I'm hearing. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hutchinson. We've just got a couple of pieces of business here to cover, and then we'll talk about the schedule going forward. The next item I want to just bring to the commission's attention is what's going on with council. You know, we talked about engaging the Collins Center, which we've done and successfully working with them tonight. But we also had this idea, and it was always been our thinking that we would have counsel on standby if needed to research any specific legal questions, and certainly to look at the charter when it was finished for any kind of legal issues. And I think I've already indicated that I wrote to 5 different law firms. I'm looking for your guidance here. This is why I want to spell out for a minute what we've done so far. We wrote to 5 law firms, all of which had some expertise in this area. One of them just didn't want the business, too busy, whatever. So then we had 4. A third one we never heard from, so now we only had 3. 2 of them we interviewed the meeting before last. We had the Wellesley firm and the Boston firm of Anderson and Krieger. We debated who we would go with, and we made the decision to hire Anderson and Krieger once we'd gone through the process. The final firm, the 5th firm, was KP Law. And I'm not quite sure, maybe some of you know what's going on there, but I don't. But I wrote to Town Council, Lauren Goldberg, who met with us at the beginning of this exercise last May. Since then, I engaged her with a question in the fall, which we never got an answer to. But at the same time, I wrote to these other 4 firms on March 10th. I also wrote to KP Law, and I just sent you this past few days a copy of the email I sent to them. And strange as it may seem, we never got any response, nothing, 0. So I sent another email to KP Law on last Wednesday, following up the previous one, asking them to please submit a proposal if they were interested. And the short of it is we didn't get any answer to that one either. So all of this comes to the point where I'm told, and I'm not sure, I haven't checked it out legally, but we need the select board's authority to hire a special counsel to this commission. So I think the only alternative I have really now is to put together a package of the rates, the proposal from the one we had selected, Anderson and Krieger, together with the narrative that we certainly approached KP Law and gave them the opportunity to weigh in on this and make their case, and asked to have us hire them, and got no response. I'm sort of anticipating where we may be at some point when we have a discussion with the select board on this issue. But that's the current status, and if you have any disagreement, that's what I propose to do. I'm just going to put together a submission. I'll submit it through the town manager and take it from there. But we do need counsel.
Yeah, I agree with that. Mr. Chairman, I agree with you. I think we've followed, I think it's the board's temperament to follow this train of thought when looking for legal counsel. We've done our due diligence, and, you know, I support you in your efforts to, you know, clarifying this with anyone as we move forward to pay for legal counsel.
Right. Thank you. So if no one disagrees, I'll do that. We're not looking to create any kind of difficulty or dispute or anything. We're just basically exercising our job here, and I think we've gone overboard, really, to try to be fair, most fair, by giving them a second shot. So much for that. Michelle put together a new calendar.
Yeah, if I could add, Mr. Chairman, just in your package to the select board, make sure you include copies of your multiple correspondence to KP and their dead silence. I mean, that's pretty embarrassing as far as I'm concerned.
Right. Yep. No, I have. That's why I kept copies. I have them, and you all have copies as well.
I think, Mr. Chairman, this underscores, too, that one of the areas we need to visit is access to town council and how that policy is. I think for committees, for the legislature, but also for citizens, my perspective is that it's used in a kind of arbitrary way, access to town council. They appear sometimes, and I'm surprised to see them. And other times when they should be there, they're not. And I think that ready access
I
should
think we
be.
just treat this straight up and
Yeah.
just move ahead with the process and explain what we've done, and we have our job to do. That's going to require council. So the other piece of business is just to go over the schedule, and if anybody had any objections, basically it's Mondays, starting, of course, tonight, and then in May, there are 3 Mondays, the 2nd, 9th, and the 16th. The 23rd, I believe, Michelle room is already taken. So the 23rd wasn't available. Was it the Finance Committee? Yeah, the Finance Committee snapped up the 23rd, and the 30th is a holiday. But if you look at the schedule, in June, we have, again, 3 Monday nights scheduled. And in July, there are 2. It's hard to see them there, but I think it's,
Tell me about you.
Michelle, could you tell us which, because the coloring is a little hard, but in June, it's the 13th, the 20th, and the...
June, it's 2 Mondays and 1 Thursday.
Isn't that Thursday, the third Thursday of the month, which would be COPC?
Well, that is the 4th Thursday of the month.
1, 2, 3, oh, yeah.
So, Michelle, would you just read the dates off so we can color them a little darker here? So in June, is it the 13th, the 20th, and the 27th?
No, the 6th, the 23rd, and the 27th. Well, the 6th, the 23rd, and the 27th.
Okay, this is in June. June 6th,
Why are some blue and some green? Maybe that was,
key's
The key is at the bottom.
Yeah.
I know, I see the key, but it says
Okay.
green
So those are-
equals meeting date, but June doesn't have any green.
Because it is a Collins that is a meeting day.
We do.
Oh, okay, I
Yes.
didn't see that.
so, right, so, yeah, June is a little,
Oh, okay, very
June is
good,
different,
sorry. I didn't
Betsy,
see that.
because
at
we
the
have it on
bottom.
the 6th, and then the week of the 20th, it wasn't available on the 20th, so we picked a Thursday.
The 20th is a holiday.
20th is a holiday.
Right, so that's why we have Thursday, the 23rd, the 20th is that new holiday in,
Have we looked at on these dates where this room is not available, the next day being May 23rd, followed by June 13th, have we looked into the 1820 courtroom? Because other people are meeting there other than the Board of Selectmen, so.
Well, when I've watched the meetings from that room, I don't know if anyone else has the opinion that when you're doing the hybrid meeting, it has been difficult to hear folks that are zooming in from the Great Hall.
Okay, well, I mean, it's only 1 or 2 nights, I think we should, look into it. It couldn't have been any worse than the sound in here last week.
So,
It would be televised. That room, they can televise from that room.
okay, so in July, you see we have 2
Can't do 2
meetings.
televisions on the same night.
what's the
What
conflict,
was that?
Bill?
What was that? It
Can't do 2 television programs on the same night, so if there's a television program going on in the,
But they can record it and send it out later.
yes,
Yeah,
right.
okay.
So where we stopped scheduling was August. There are 4 dates in green. We only need to meet twice in August, so we could actually pick which dates there you want. We've reserved all 4 for now, but I don't think we want to have 4 meetings in August. And then the meeting in September, the 12th is the Monday night before the report is due that Friday. It's due on Friday, the 16th of September. And then we have a follow-up meeting the following Monday, the 19th. And then in October, again, we have a choice of how many meetings we want, but the green is we've so far reserved the room those nights, but we may not need them, depending on how much changes we're going to make to the preliminary draft. And November is when the final report is due, November 16th. So I think we have enough nights here reserved. We may not need all of them, but we have enough to get the job done. Thank you. So we had two sets of two sets of minutes. We had the minutes of April 4th. Are we ready to approve them tonight? Motion to approve the minutes of April 4th, seconded.
I'll second it.
Any discussion, any mistakes? All in favor of those minutes? Approved. And then we had one other set of minutes, which I believe was the
Okay,
11th.
Mr. Chairman, I abstain from the April 4th
Mr.
minutes.
Peck abstained, so noted. And then we had one other set of minutes that were circulated,
11.
which was April 11th. Is there a motion to approve those minutes? All in favor of approving the minutes of April 11th? Okay, so those minutes are also approved.
Right.
Is there any new business? Actually, I should say old business first. Any old business? Any new business? Betsy?
Yes, is it Derek Brindisi coming to our next meeting? Is
Pardon me?
the new town manager, Derek, is he coming to our next meeting? We got an email from Derek Brindisi, the town
Yes,
manager.
the new business is that the town manager weighed in a few days ago and asked to come to our meeting, so he's been invited for May 2nd, which is our next meeting, Monday night. He's also made some comments which were helpful on the charter, and I believe I circulated to you just some little red annotations in our current charter that he thinks needs to be fixed. There were basically mistakes which he thought were either inconsistent language or didn't make sense or were illegal, but they're helpful. And I thanked him for his comments, and I'm actually going to see him on Wednesday and explain the process. So this is very interesting that he definitely wants to be in the game, and he will be at our next meeting. Any other? That's the nature of new business. If that is the only business we have left, then let's, motion to adjourn would be in order.
Motion to adjourn. Second.
All in favor of adjournment? We're adjourned. Thank you.